May 13th, 1998, a freezing morning after a violent storm on a Himalayan peak. A team of Italian climbers pushed up toward Camp 2, expecting nothing more than silence after 2 days of failed radio calls. But when they reached a snow-covered tent, something felt wrong. The fabric wasn't torn. The camp wasn't wrecked. Everything looked untouched, too untouched. They opened the tent. Inside, a lady lay on the ground. Her neck snapped clean. Beside her, her Sherpa partner rested as if asleep, his body showing no injuries. No signs of a struggle, no collapse, no chaos. Just a broken neck in a tent that should have protected her. And the moment her name was spoken, the mountain wasn't quiet anymore. It was full of questions no one could answer. This is the story of Chantal Mauduit, a black widow of mountaineering. Welcome to the Extreme Edge. In the rugged world of high-altitude mountaineering during the 1990s, Chantal Mauduit was the one woman climber who stood apart from the rest. With her bright spandex tights, flower-painted tents, and ever-present stuffed goose mascot, she seemed more like a celebrity than a climber risking her life on the world's deadliest mountains. By her early 30s, she had conquered 6 of the world's most dangerous peaks without using extra oxygen. This French and unapologetically feminine climber was a breath of fresh air in a sport dominated by hardened men. Magazines like Outside praised her as a striking new face and celebrated her bold style. But with fame came controversy. Beside the cheerful colors and magazine covers was a woman whose life was far stranger and more complicated than anyone imagined, and a dark nickname that followed her everywhere, the Black Widow. To understand where this nickname came from, we would have to go all the way back to 1992. Chantal was attempting to become just the 4th woman in history to stand on top of what is widely considered the most dangerous mountain on Earth, K2. And on August 3rd, 1992, Chantal made it. She successfully reached the top of K2 without bottled oxygen, which is a feat and a half in itself. As you would expect, this was incredibly good news for her. She even celebrated her triumph by planting her ice axe at the summit. But as she began her descent, things took a dark turn, literally. High above 26,000 feet, Chantal's vision started fading. The intense sunlight reflecting off endless ice and snow had burned her eyes so severely that she was rapidly going snowblind. Within minutes, her whole world became a blurry haze of white and gray, and soon she could barely see at all. Now high on one of the most dangerous mountains on the planet, Chantal was trapped and unable to safely climb down. Barely able to move without risking a deadly fall. Just below her were 2 American climbers, Ed Viesturs and Scott Fisher. They were on their way to the summit and about to make history themselves. They were strong, experienced, and determined, moving carefully up the treacherous slope, step by step. Suddenly, they noticed something strange above them, a lone figure stumbling awkwardly, barely hanging on. Confused and worried, they quickly moved closer. Within moments, their hearts sank. It was clear this climber was in serious trouble. Ed and Scott faced a life-changing decision: keep going and fulfill their own dreams of reaching K2's summit, or risk their lives trying to save a stranger who seemed barely alive. They abandoned their climb without hesitating and raced toward the struggling climber. When they finally reached her, they saw Chantal was shaking, disoriented, and nearly blind. Carefully and slowly, the 2 climbers took her arms and started leading her down the mountain, risking everything with each careful step they took. One wrong move would send all 3 plunging thousands of feet to certain death. The effort was exhausting, slow, and terrifying. But after hours of inching down the icy slopes, they finally reached safety. By the time they reached base camp, Viesturs and Fisher were utterly spent. They collapsed in their tents immediately. They had saved Chantal's life, but in doing so, they'd sacrificed their own chance at climbing K2. Amazing, right? But when she finally reached base camp after being rescued, Chantal did something that shocked everyone who witnessed it. That night, as Viesturs and Fisher rested, the sounds of celebration drifted through camp. Outside, Chantal was reportedly laughing and chatting with other climbers, talking about her successful summit. The two men who had risked everything sat silently, exhausted and forgotten, waiting for Chantal to come and thank them or even acknowledge them at all. But she never came. Tiny detour on this chaos train. If you'd like to be a part of the extreme community, see exclusive videos made just for you, get early access to our other content, and vote on content polls, come join us on Patreon. See you there. So now Chantal was celebrating with the Russians. We'd hear their cheers and revelry as we lay silent in our tents. Scott and I hadn't been invited to the party. Ed Viesturs wrote in his book, "No shortcuts to the top." She didn't thank them in front of the group, nor did she offer any public statement about the rescue afterward. The story of her silence spread quickly. In the tight-knit climbing community, it didn't go unnoticed. And in the months that followed, climbers began to whisper behind her back. They didn't question her skill, but her character. How could someone as experienced as Chantal show so little gratitude toward the people who risked their lives to save hers? It was after this incident that whispers began circulating, branding her the Black Widow, a climber who used others for safety, only to discard them afterward. Unfortunately, it was just the beginning of a pattern that would follow Chantal throughout her career. 1 year after climbing K2, Chantal found herself in a difficult situation. She was desperate to continue her ambitious climbing career, but there was one major problem: money. The cost of obtaining permits for Himalayan expeditions had risen dramatically. In 1993, the standard climbing permit for a mountain like Shishapangma cost around $3,000. That might not sound like much today, but adjusted for inflation, that's over $6,600 in today's money, and that's just the permit. And even though she was technically a professional climber, Chantal wasn't earning much at all. At the time, she was making a living by working part-time at a climbing gear shop in France and picking up sponsorships where she could. But we're not talking big money. Her income barely covered her basic needs, let alone the cost of Himalayan expeditions. Remember, just the permit alone for Shishapangma cost about $3,000 back then. Add gear, flights, food, and support, and you're easily looking at $15,000 to $20,000, or the price of a brand new car then, just to attempt to climb. That was completely out of reach for someone like Chantal, who was more well-known than she was well-paid. So when she couldn't afford the permit, she didn't cancel the climb, she just went anyway. With barely enough supplies to survive, Chantal secretly crossed into Tibet and set her sights on not one, but two 26,000-foot peaks, Shishapangma and Cho Oyu, despite having no permits and no official recognition. She was essentially poaching peaks, and this was a serious offense. So serious, in fact, that if caught, she could have been arrested and permanently banned from climbing in the region ever again. What made this even more outrageous was that Chantal planned to summit both mountains in quick succession. And the craziest part, she actually pulled it off. With just a small backpack of supplies and no backup, Chantal climbed rapidly and quietly, leaving no trace behind. She slipped unnoticed onto Shishapangma, reaching its 26,335-foot summit in record time. Then, instead of heading down and quietly escaping before she was caught, she immediately set off for Cho Oyu, determined to claim a second illegal summit. Within days, she had reached the top of Cho Oyu as well, standing completely alone atop the 26,906-foot peak, breathing heavily in the thin, freezing air. When news of her unauthorized climb eventually leaked out, the reaction in the climbing community was mixed. Some were awed by her boldness and determination. Others were less impressed. To them, her actions were disrespectful to both the mountains and the countries that protected them, and once again, the nickname Black Widow started creeping back into conversations. Whispers spread that Chantal didn't play by the rules, that she would always do whatever it took to reach the top, even if others had to pay the price. 2 years later, in 1995, Chantal was on Mount Everest. Her aim this time was to reach the summit without using any supplemental oxygen. This was her fourth attempt to summit the world's highest peak. Her previous attempts had failed for one reason or another, and this time, she was determined to reach the peak. But this climb on Everest would become one of the most controversial events in her career. On May 10, 1995, Chantal was high on Everest's south summit at 29,000 feet, just below the true summit. when her body suddenly shut down. Remember, she was climbing without supplemental oxygen in an area where the oxygen in the air is just a fraction of what her body was normally used to. Without extra oxygen, her lungs were starved for air, and her mind became dangerously confused. She collapsed onto the icy slope, nearly unconscious and unable to move. Climbers who saw her lying there knew instantly that she was moments from death. One of those climbers happened to be Ed Viesturs, the same man who had saved Chantal's life 3 years earlier on K2. When he spotted her collapsed body high above 28,000 feet, he was stunned. Once again, Chantal was trapped high on a deadly mountain, and once again, others were faced with risking their lives to save hers. What would you do if you were Ed? Here's a climber who never thanked you for risking your life to save hers 3 years ago, who celebrated her summit while you sat exhausted in your tent, your own dreams abandoned for her sake. Would you put your life on the line again for someone who showed such little gratitude? Or would you consider it karma and continue with your own climb? Well, with no time to lose, Ed and a few others sprang into action. Fighting through brutal winds and dangerously thin air, they reached Chantal and found her completely unresponsive. They worked hard to revive her and somehow miraculously got her breathing again. Then, slowly and carefully, they brought her down Everest's deadly slopes to safety. For the second time, Ed Viesturs found himself carefully guiding a barely alive Chantal Mauduit down one of the world's most dangerous mountains, risking his own life every step of the way. When they finally reached safety, some climbers started questioning Chantal's decisions. Why did she repeatedly put herself and others into these life-threatening situations? Was she just unlucky, or did she rely on rescues as part of her strategy? But even after nearly losing her life for a second time, Chantal refused to slow down or change her approach. She kept climbing, kept seeking out the most dangerous mountains, and kept attracting controversy everywhere she went. And in the spring of 1996, just 1 year after the near disaster on Everest, Chantal found herself in the eye of another storm. On May 1996, Chantal returned to the Himalayas to climb Lhotse, the fourth highest mountain in the world. As you'd expect, Chantal planned to reach the 27,940-foot summit completely alone, with no Sherpas, no teammates, and again, no supplemental oxygen. If she succeeded, Chantal would become the first woman in history to solo summit Lhotse without bottled oxygen. It would be a record-breaking achievement that would silence her critics once and for all. And on May 10, 1996, Chantal announced she had done it. She claimed she stood alone on Lhotse's summit and achieved what no other woman had ever managed. It should have been her greatest moment, the triumph that erased every doubt about her climbing skill. But almost immediately, people started asking questions. When Chantal returned to base camp, fellow climbers immediately noticed strange details about her story. No one had actually seen her reach the summit, and she had taken no summit photos, which was something climbers almost always did as proof. And there was another problem. Ed Viesturs, the climber who had twice saved her life, was also on Lhotse at the same time. He was climbing behind her and later claimed that from his viewpoint, Chantal never made it to the top. In his report to Elizabeth Hawley, the legendary Himalayan chronicler, Ed claimed that he watched Chantal from below as she climbed a steep gully just beneath the summit, but instead of continuing all the way to the top, she supposedly turned around and descended without ever reaching the summit ridge. In his words to Hawley, it was clear that she did not reach the summit. It's out of character that she turns back. Ed alone had 2 incidents with her where she almost died. Who knows if there were more? Ed's report immediately caused confusion and suspicion. Did Chantal really lie about making it to the summit? Or was Ed mistaken, perhaps blinded by bitterness or bias against her? No one could prove anything for sure, but Chantal insisted she had reached the top. She stood by her story, and in the end, because there was no hard proof either way of her not reaching the summit, Elizabeth Hawley chose to list the climb as successful in her records. That meant Chantal was officially recognized as the first woman to summit Lhotse without supplemental oxygen. By now, Chantal had become one of the most admired and controversial figures in climbing history. But nothing could prepare the climbing world for the next chapter that would soon unfold, because Chantal was about to return to the Himalayas one last time, and what happened next would become one of mountaineering's strangest mysteries. In early 1998, Chantal was getting ready for her next great achievement. After summiting 6 26,000-foot peaks, she was rapidly closing in on her ultimate goal, to become the first woman to climb all 14 of the world's highest mountains. Her next target was Dhaulagiri, the world's 7th highest peak. Now, by this point, the nickname Black Widow had spread throughout the climbing community. The implication was that Chantal used men for support or safety in the mountains and then discarded them afterward. But despite all the controversy, Chantal remained as lighthearted as ever. In April 1998, Chantal arrived at Dhaulagiri Base Camp with her Sherpa partner, Cheering. Unlike many climbers who worked with different Sherpas on different expeditions, Chantal had formed a strong partnership with Cheering. He had been with her on several successful climbs and trusted her judgment. At base camp, Chantal Mauduit was nothing like the ominous nickname that followed her. She was playful, full of laughter, and had an almost childlike warmth that drew people in. Her tent was famously decorated with bright colors, and her stuffed toy goose was never far from her side. She was known to cook meals for fellow climbers, share sweets she'd brought from France, and greet people with kisses on both cheeks, as if she were hosting a dinner party instead of preparing for a life-threatening ascent. Sherpas often described her as generous, respectful, and cheerful, someone who radiated optimism even when the weather turned brutal or an expedition went sideways. Also on the mountain that season was a familiar face, Ed Viesturs. Yes, the same Ed. The American climber who had twice rescued Chantal and who had questioned her Lhotse summit claim. Their paths had crossed repeatedly over the years, creating a strange connection between two very different climbers. Whether by coincidence or fate, Ed would once again be present for a pivotal moment in Chantal's story. As April turned to May, the weather on Dhaulagiri grew increasingly unpredictable. Sudden storms would sweep across the mountain, dropping feet of fresh snow before disappearing just as quickly. It was during one of these brief weather windows on May 11th that Chantal and Cheering made their move, establishing camp at around 21,000 feet. Their plan was simple: wait at the camp for the next good weather window, then make a push for the summit. They radioed down to base camp, reporting they had set up their tent and were waiting for conditions to improve. Their voices sounded strong and confident. No one could have known it would be the last time anyone would hear from them. That night, another storm rolled in, and it was much stronger than predicted. Heavy snow and high winds battered the upper slopes of Dhaulagiri for hours. When morning came and radio calls to Camp 2 went unanswered, climbers at base camp grew concerned, but not immediately alarmed. Radio batteries die, and sometimes climbers sleep in after a stormy night. But as the hours passed with no contact, concern turned to worry. By the next morning, May 13th, with still no word from Chantal and Cheering, a rescue plan was put into motion. A team of Italian climbers who were well acclimatized volunteered to climb up and check out what was going on with them. And so, on that freezing morning in May of 1998, the Italian climbers set out into the thin air and biting cold, made their way toward camp up the Dhaulagiri, saw her tent, and discovered the final chapter in Chantal's controversial story. There, lying on the ground with a clearly broken neck, was Chantal with her Sherpa partner beside her. It was an unexpected end to such a colorful character. News of Chantal's demise spread quickly through the climbing world, and immediately the questions began. For one thing, Cheering showed none of the same injuries. His body had no visible damage. It was as if he had simply fallen asleep and never woken up. For another, the tent itself was largely intact. It wasn't even badly damaged, as you would expect if they had been hit by something powerful enough to break her neck, like, say, a rock fall or an earthquake. Ed Viesturs suggested something else altogether: carbon monoxide poisoning. Although it was highly dangerous, climbers sometimes run cooking stoves inside sealed tents when they're desperate for warmth, and the fumes can kill silently. It's a basic but deadly mistake sometimes made by exhausted climbers at high heights. Chantal's friends were outraged by such suggestions. Her close friend Frédéric Delrieux who personally retrieved Chantal's body, insisted that a freak avalanche was the only explanation. She furiously rejected any implication that Chantal had been careless or negligent, pointing out that after 18 years of expeditions, Chantal always preached snow safety and never ran a stove in a sealed tent. And also, Ed's theory couldn't explain Chantal's broken neck. In a letter she wrote defending her friend, Delrue said, Chantal took part in 18 expeditions, participated in hundreds of well-known ascents throughout the world, and she had been climbing for 18 years. Do you think you can go back 18 times in a row to the highest altitudes and participate in as many of the most demanding vertical trips by climbing carelessly? Do you think Chantal and Shearing, as experienced as they were, did not know that you have to take off the excess snow from the tent and that you do not cook inside? This is one of the first things that Chantal taught me. Her climbing friends can testify. Chantal was optimistic, adventurous, strong, and determined, but her master word was prudence. Mountains are dangerous and stronger than all of us. That should be clear. Chantal lost her life by following her passion for high altitude. She did not make a mistake, but even if she had, there are more important things to remember than that. When French authorities performed an autopsy back in France, they confirmed Chantal's neck was broken, but couldn't definitively prove what had caused it. So the official leading theory is that a small, localized avalanche hit their tent during the night. This micro-avalanche, or perhaps a falling block of ice, was just powerful enough to strike precisely where Chantal was sleeping, breaking her neck instantly while somehow missing on Shearing entirely. The tent itself wasn't destroyed because the impact was so specific and concentrated. Many climbers found this explanation hard to accept, but in the absence of a better explanation, this pretty much became the accepted version of events. Chantal Mauduit, one of the most controversial figures in mountaineering, had passed away in an equally controversial way, a demise as puzzling as her life had been. What do you think really happened? Let me know in the comments section. Want to support the channel? Join for exclusive perks. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Stay bold and live brave.